Welcome to Trailblazers and Titans with your host, Dr. Keith Haney. Trailblazers and Titans is your go-to podcast for insights, inspiration, and actionable advice from the world's most successful entrepreneurs and leaders. Each episode features in-depth interviews with industry pioneers, innovative thinkers, and business moguls who share their journeys, challenges, and strategies for success. Whether you're an aspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned leader, or someone looking to make a significant impact, this podcast provides the tools and motivation to blaze your trail and become a titan in your field. Tune in to learn, grow, and transform your vision into reality.
A highly accomplished entrepreneur with an impressive blend of expertise in finance and strategic management. With an MBA in finance and a CPA certification, he has a proven track record of success in diverse fields, including project management, economic consulting, corporate strategy, portfolio analysis, and budget analysis. His specialized skills in transfer pricing, accounting, and valuation have been effectively applied across various sectors, including restaurant development. He currently represents the St. James School of Medicine, a leading international medical school with campuses in the Caribbean islands and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. For over 25 years at St. James School of Medicine, he is dedicated to providing students with high-quality, affordable medical education. This esteemed institution primarily caters to U.S. and Canadian students, offering a unique alternative to traditional medical education. With over 800 successful alumni now practicing as physicians across North America, St. James School of Medicine stands as a testament to his commitment to excellence in medical education. His involvement in the school showcases his dedication to fostering a world-class learning environment and promoting the importance of accessible medical education. We welcome him to the podcast. Well, welcome to the podcast, my friend. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited to talk to you. I think we're going to have a great conversation, so I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Good. I love to ask my guests this question. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
So this is a very interesting one, especially being a business leader. I think a lot of people raise their eyebrows a little bit at this, but the best piece of advice that I have ever received, it's basically that money cannot and should not ever be a cause. It should always be an effect. So, for example, if you want to be a singer, don't be a singer because singers are popular and rich. Be a singer because you are truly passionate about singing. And then the money will follow if you are a good singer. And I truly think that has resonated very much through my career. If you enjoy doing something and you do it well, the effects just follow. And never do anything because somebody is rich. Never be a football player because football players make a lot of money. Be a football player because you love the game. Be a singer because you love the game. Be an actor because you love acting, not because actors are rich. And I think that's the biggest, best advice that I've ever received.
That's good because you can do a lot of things for the wrong reason and you may achieve success, but if you didn't do it because you loved it, no matter how rich and successful you are, you'll never be happy in it.
Exactly.
I love that.
So, yeah. And, I've seen so many, especially kids nowadays, a lot of them want to be lawyers and accountants, but they don't necessarily like the subject at all. And I can tell you already that if you don't like the subject, becoming an accountant doing this 60, 80 hours a week, or a lawyer doing the 60, 80 hours a week, you're just not going to enjoy it. You're going to burn out. And you're honestly not going to make a whole lot of money either doing either of these. The people who are really successful accountants or lawyers, they are so passionate about what they do. The ones who are, partners at firms and stuff like that, these are the guys who are really passionate about what they're doing. Not necessarily, you can tell that they didn't get into the field because, oh, hey, I can get a job easily. That's not the reason why they got into law or accounting. And I'm just using those as an example because those are the fields that I deal with the most in business.
Having taken accounting 1 and 2 in college, I can tell you that if you don't love it, don't get into it.
Right. No, absolutely. And, that's true with anything. Like, I mean, you're an expert at organizational research and HR topics. Even that's something you cannot necessarily hone and master unless you're genuinely interested in doing it.
I loved your bio, and I love what experiences you bring to the table. I'm curious, who are some people in your life who served as a mentor for you or maybe inspiration? If you want to tell us what made them special for you in your life and give them a shout out, here's a chance to do that.
Yeah. So I would say that there were primarily two people who really influenced me. One is my father, right? For better or for worse, he's been a very active part of my life right throughout, as far back as I can remember, obviously. And, you know, the whole money thing, this was his advice. He was like, you know, do whatever you want to do. Just don't do it because either other people are doing it or because it will make you rich. Just do it because you really want to do it. And that really motivated me. And obviously he's been a mentor to me right throughout every step of the way. Any advice that I need, he's always there. He's always given me great advice. And also, you know, I spent about 10 years in consulting. And during that time, the last 5 years, I had a great boss. His name was Carl Rothfuss. So if Carl, you're listening to this, shout out to you. I haven't been in touch with him, obviously, for a very long time. But he taught me a lot of things about leadership that honestly, I think that in those days were kind of cutting edge. For example, he taught me that, you know, mistakes are not the end of the world. Mistakes are growing opportunities. So there's no reason to be afraid of mistakes, which in the world of consulting is, at least at the time, was, you know, you can't make mistakes. That's what pretty much the watchword was. So that, and also the way he handled our entire team, to him, there were no high performers and low performers. If there were low performers, to him, it was like they're not in the right niche that they need to be. If they are working for me, it's because they're already good. If they're not performing optimally, there's something going on. It could be external factors. It could be internal factors. Maybe they're put on projects that's not their core competency. So, for example, if someone's more analytical, then they would put him in more. Then my boss would put that person in a more analytical role in different projects, and he extracted the most out of employees that way. And you know, I think that was a great tenet, and that's something I've always tried to emulate ever since.
I love that. I want to get into your journey because your journey to me seems so fascinating from where you started to where you are. So tell us about your journey from earning an MBA in finance and becoming a CPA to your current role at St. James School of Medicine. Right.
So, you know, I came to India into 2003. You know, I ended up in Chicago. Got into a grad program to do an MBA in finance. And then when I graduated, I just realized that, you know, my qualifications were enough to get me a CPA. And I took the first part. I passed it pretty easily without any preparation. So I took the other three parts and I kind of passed all of them relatively easily without a whole lot of stress or pressure. And it took me about 9 months to do all of them. And then when I graduated, as soon as so I finished my MBA and I ended up with the CPA roughly at the same time, which unbeknownst to me was a great move because I was incredibly marketable. And everybody, like, I did not have any difficulty getting a job in 2006. Of course, it was a great time also to graduate. And I got into economic consulting. This was something I never heard of. So my undergrad was in economic. I had a triple major in economic statistics and math. And I worked for a year and a half as a marketing analyst before that in a small company. And I got my MBA in finance. And then I got out and I got a job in applied economic consulting, which at the time, I didn't know what it was. I'm pretty sure a lot of people still don't know what it is. It's a very niche field, extremely highly paid, which is amazing. And it's basically you deal with companies that, you're dealing with antitrust issues, you're dealing with intellectual property valuation, you're dealing with valuation of cross-border transactions between related parties. So these were the three major aspects of it. But I ended up specializing in intellectual property valuation, which is essentially what is the value of a brand. For example, Jack Daniels. How much is the name Jack Daniels worth? If you slap it on a T-shirt, is this going to sell? Is like Ragu pasta sauce more valuable than the store-bought pasta sauce? That's a simple analogy where you go to the grocery store, the generic brands are 50 cents cheaper than Ragu or Prego. And that's your value of the brand. So that's what we did on a much bigger scale. Which was really cool because my group that I worked with was comprised of PhDs, lawyers, CPAs, MBAs, tax accountants, you name it. It was such a diverse group. We had so much of fun and we had a great boss. I really, really enjoyed it. But then eventually at some point, I woke up one day, call it a midlife crisis, if you will, and I was like, I love my job, but do I see myself doing this till the time I'm 60? I want a little bit more variety in what I'm doing. I don't want to necessarily get my last job when I'm in my early to mid 20s. So I was like, I went talk to my wife and I was like, who needs a savings account anyway? Let's just go start a business. So we started a restaurant, my wife and I, and we ran it for about 7 years until the pandemic. I wouldn't call it a very successful venture. I did break even, but I did not make money on it. In fact, I lost a lot of money, especially when you factor in the first 3 years of operating it, which is why this whole aspect of do something because you love it is such a true analogy, because no matter what you do, there's going to be such trials and tribulations that if you truly are not passionate about it, you won't be able to continue. And in the restaurant, the first 3 years, I went from being a consultant with a very high salary to running a restaurant where me and my wife were at a point where we couldn't afford meals. It came to that. So for example, I remember we would sit there on a weekend and, me and my wife would do some quick math and be like, hey, can we even afford some Chinese takeout instead of just trying to eat at home or eating some of the restaurant food? And that was a real struggle. And I think it was very character building. And then, and then in the meantime, I started consulting for my father's company. My father basically owns or founded the medical school that I work for right now, and I head. And there were some gaps that needed to be filled, and I sat down with him and I said, hey, these are the gaps. And he was like, well, I'm getting pretty old. It would be nice if you could join, which I did. And we had some severe headwinds in 2017 when I joined. So I started consulting in about 2014, maybe an hour or two a week. And then eventually in 2017, we had some severe headwinds and we were at quite a crossroads as far as the business is concerned. And at that point, there was decisions that needed to be made, and my father really leaned on me at that time. And then he along with our vice presidents and as a group, we kind of sat down and we decided that, hey, we do need some more active leadership and people who kind of understand the current markets a little bit more. So I took the role as executive vice president at St. James around 2017. And fortunately, touch wood, things have been great since then. I mean, we've taken new steps. We've changed our infrastructure. We've changed the way we do business. We've changed the way we market our school. And I, just love it. And the team that I have is just downright amazing. We've got some group of vice presidents who are incredibly flexible, incredibly hardworking. And that's why I keep saying that. And they truly love what they do. And I can tell you this much, that we're not the highest payers in the industry, but they've stuck around for 10, 15 years. And that's testament to what my father started. That's a testament to the organization. And that's a testament to our team that we have and the way we work.
So tell us a little bit about what makes St. James School of Medicine unique?
So I think the biggest driving force for St. James is that, number one, it's the largest family-owned medical school in North America. Again, that's unverified, but I don't know if any other family-owned medical school that's bigger than the ones that we have. What causes a family-owned medical school to be very unique is that truly this business it's a for-profit business, but it is truly people-focused and not profit-focused. So, for example, if you have, so the other Caribbean medical schools are all backed by private equity. If you're backed by private equity is constantly asking you for a certain return. Whereas with us, our biggest tool is the flexibility in our margins. So, for example, we can make big investments without necessarily dramatically increasing tuition. We can build a multi-million-dollar campus without having students to pay out of pocket with a 30-40% increase. In fact, I would say when we started in 1999 till 2021 was the last I checked, our annual tuition growth rate was adjusted for inflation was about 1.7%. That's less than the Chicago CTA, which is the Public Transit Authority. And this is a government entity that has a dramatically higher tuition growth or cost growth rate or price growth rate than we do. And that's the true leverage that a family business has, is that everything is focused on quality. Everything is focused on the people. We focus on relationships. We focus on the relationships that we have. We have 800 plus alumni. And we're very much in touch with every single one of them. And every single one of our students wants to give back. They like the fact that we're not a giant institution where they call and they're just another number. They know that the professors remember them, the deans remember them, the provost remembers them, the administration remembers them. They're just not a number. And I think that that's truly unique about our school, whereas everywhere else you call somebody and they're like, yes, give me your student ID. And then, whereas we're like, and I hear these conversations all the time. If somebody calls in for a transcript, like, oh, hey, how are you doing? I mean, how's everything going? How's your wife? How's the kids? How are you liking your the place where you're doing residency? This is that sort of conversation that you just don't get. I will also say this, that we get so many donuts from our alumni that it's not easy on the waistline. I can tell you that much. Almost every week we get 2 or 3 days where people are sending us donuts just for the heck of it. And again, I'm not necessarily complaining. I totally love Dunkin', but we get a lot of it. So I think that is testament. I know it's a small gesture, but I don't know any other, and I know a lot of people in larger universities and mainstream organizations that don't have the relationships that we do with our students and our student base and our alumni base. And we love it.
That's great. You mentioned something I really want to dig into because it's kind of one of those things that I'm passionate about. You mentioned there was an inflection point where St. James had to make a organizational shift. Yes. What was the point of urgency that created the need for a shift?
So from 2011 to 2017, we had declining revenue growth, to the point that in 2017 we had Hurricane Irma. I'm sure you remember Puerto Rico was devastated. Our island was also devastated, and there were some significant financial losses. Up to that point, the financial structure of the business was not necessarily conducive to be able to absorb losses. I don't necessarily want to go into the technicalities because this is hardcore accounting mumbo jumbo.
Sure.
So basically in a nutshell, what was happening is most businesses can either carry forward a loss or deduct a loss from all the revenues. But the way our business was structured, unfortunately, we couldn't deduct any of the losses because we never anticipated having any losses. And because of that, so you have all these losses, and on top of that, you have to pay taxes because we couldn't deduct it for tax purposes. So it was kind of a double whammy. And also at that time, I think that there was a shift in the market, because this is the time around 2017 when social media, or as you would call the Web 3.0 revolution, was starting. Where a lot of Instagram and Facebook was beginning to change the way it operated, other than just like a little communication tool. It was getting into things with videos and stuff like that. That is also the time that cell phone camera popularity kind of shot up. So we had to rethink the way we market to students, because the students were not thinking like, I'm 42. Students were not thinking like a 42-year-old, or at that time it was late 30s. Because to me, social media has always been, oh my God, I don't want to deal with it. It's too complicated. I want to stay away from it. I just want to, see some pictures here now and then, and that's about it. But that's not how a 20-year-old or a 22-year-old views social media. They were using it as for various utilitarian purposes, and we really needed to understand what that was. So we revamped our marketing. We revamped our finance, because obviously we needed to change the financial structure quite dramatically. I revamped HR, and this is entirely your field of expertise. What I'm particularly proud of is that, so in 2017, we had massive losses because, as I mentioned, we had a double whammy. But in 2018, the losses were dramatically less. And then ever since then, we've been on the up and up with revenue. But the only reason we could do that was that I came in, and without laying a single person off, I completely restructured the team, essentially using what I learned in consulting, where my boss, the way he ran his team. He focused on people's strengths and put them in projects that cater to their strengths. And that's exactly what I did. So when I came in, I identified somebody who had a lot of numbers acumen, or numerical acumen, or analytical acumen. I took them and I put them in a relatively sales-based role, because we needed more insight on how our admissions was working. And he went into the details of how, the numbers about the number of leads coming in and the entire throughput of our student life cycle, which was amazing. And everyone was like, well, but he's never had any sales experience. I was like, I don't necessarily need that. I need insights. And then we can figure out, with this gentleman's help, what the next best thing would be. If we need somebody who's a people person, we can get that people person. But I'm not letting somebody who's an asset, who's been in our company for 3, 4, 5 years and has all this intellectual, knowledge about our business, and then letting them go. Somebody who's worked for 5 years, I mean, if they're really not that good and they continued for 5 years, that's shame on the manager.
Right.
But if they're around for 5 years, it means that they're pretty good. And that's my opinion. And then that's exactly what we did. So we restructured all our vice presidents. Our vice presidents got new roles and new oversight divisions. And every single one of them has excelled since then. I mean, there's also a time that happens, a little bit of fatigue, people doing the same thing over and over again. Call it a little bit of a shake-up. But we didn't have to let anybody go. We kept the same management team, and everybody did really, really well. And, again, it's through a collective effort, we turned everything around, and things have been great for us since.
That's a great story. I am curious. I hear a little bit about some of the external challenges that medical schools are facing, just because of cultural shifts and definitions of just people. How are you guys dealing with maybe external pressure to maybe look at training of physicians differently now than you did maybe 20 years ago?
Right. So, for lack of a better term, I would say that the market is, let's just call it bittersweet. What that means is that 20 years ago, Caribbean medical schools were kind of an unheard phenomenon. People didn't really know what to expect. Fast forward 20 years, people definitely know about Caribbean schools, but the problem is that there are over 75 Caribbean medical schools.
Wow.
Only about 20 are accredited, though. And that's where the issue arises. So now people have an image of Caribbean schools, but it's not a positive one. But I will tell you, the 20 odd Caribbean schools that are accredited, they're just as good as any US school. And that's a very big challenge for us to demarcate us from the schools that are not accredited, because the schools that are not accredited, they can say, they can do clinicals wherever, they can, they don't care how many times their students take the test. They don't have metrics that they need to submit. Whereas our accreditation depends on success rates and metrics. Not just us, every single one of the 20 accredited Caribbean schools. So that's been the challenge. So people definitely know more about it, but it's something like, I try to, equate it to, say, a lot of people hesitate to go and buy groceries at Walmart because Walmart is considered to be,
kind of a catch-all.
Yeah. but at the end of the day, Walmart has the same brand of groceries that, in some cases Whole Foods has, or your local Mariano's or Kroger has. And keeping that in mind, I would say medical schools are roughly the same. Like, people are like, Caribbean medical schools are looked at as the Walmarts of medical education, which is, for better or for worse, it's an image that we have to deal with. But the way you fight that is a track record. We have 800 plus alumni practicing medicine in USA and Canada. And on top of that, you also have this perception that, okay, you're a Walmart, and our tuition is about 50% cheaper than any US school. And people also have this image that, okay, you get what you pay for. But that's not entirely true. As I said, we're a family school. We family-run business. So we have the flexibility of margins. We can easily move our operating margins to a point that is comfortable to all of us, including our employees. So that's a big flexibility that we have that actually most businesses, and especially publicly traded businesses, just don't have, because investors are expecting a certain amount of returns. And if you don't hit those returns, you're negatively dinged. And in my opinion, that's a big fallacy with, U.S. corporate finance, is that we are just constantly chasing growth. But in order to grow, there has to be a certain point of inflection where growth slows down, and then you grow, and then you see an upward trajectory. And after a certain period, when that profit plateaus, again, you have to rethink and revisit the business again. And at that point, your growth is just not going to be there. And I really feel that the way we're taught corporate finance, or we're taught to look at shares in the stock market and things like that, that's not very beneficial for the long-term growth of companies in general.
I love that. I ran across a term that I don't know, haven't heard much about, but I want you to kind of tell us a bit about it, what you mean by that, and how it is important for the business environment today. That term is transfer pricing.
Mm-hmm. So transfer pricing is basically the valuation of intercompany cross-border transactions. This is, in a nutshell, a way for large corporations to move money to lower tax jurisdictions internationally legally. And as a consultant, my job was to largely come up with frameworks for these companies to do this without getting in trouble with the IRS. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not necessarily offshoring. To a certain extent, it has the same elements of offshoring, but this is perfectly legal. It is actually most often than not given a framework, or a guideline is given by the IRS that they're okay with it. So, for example, Ireland has a 9% tax. USA has 35 plus state and local, which typically gets up to 42. Now, if you make $100 in the USA, you're only getting, $58 back. Whereas if you go to Ireland, you're getting $91. So for a corporation, it makes most sense for them to show the profit in Ireland. The IRS has regulations that clearly state how you can show that your profit is not gained in the United States. And it's a perfectly legal way of doing this. But you have to be very well versed in economics. You have to be very well versed in law. And you obviously have to be very well versed in taxes to be able to do this. And which is why my team's always comprised of PhDs, lawyers, CPAs, MBAs in finance and whatnot. So what we would do is come up with a transfer price, which is if you can move the ownership of the products that are being produced and being sold in U.S. markets to a lower tax jurisdiction like Ireland, then you basically show the income in Ireland. But the IRS always said that, hey, I know what you did here. There is a price that you would have to pay, which is what they call, quote unquote, arm's length, which means that if you were unrelated parties, this is what the transaction would be. And you need to pay that, quote unquote, price in the United States. So we would create large and very complicated structures for international corporates where they would transfer some of their ownership or intellectual property to international jurisdictions, to lower tax jurisdictions, by paying the IRS a fee, so to speak, a transfer price, so to speak, where the IRS is happy and the corporates are also happy because they're saving on some taxes. So unlike offshoring, we're evading taxes. This is a tax planning tool that we would use.
That's good to know. I had never heard that before. Thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, and that just goes to show that in the world, there's just so many random things happening that people, just aren't privy to. There's so many niches out there. So if anybody ever wants to think of a career, that's what I tell my kids is that, you'll figure it out, when you get out there. There are just so many interesting niches out there that you can really, really be very successful at.
I love that. So what's on the horizon next for St. James School of Medicine?
So I think we're going through a pretty major expansion now. We're building a $13 million campus on the island of St. Vincent. We have some aggressive growth plans. We have some major partnerships coming up in the horizon. And I think, going back to your previous question, these are all things that we're doing to essentially prepare for a changing student base, so to speak. One thing that I will say is, and this is something that my father has been very, very passionate about as early as in the 1980s, is that higher education in the United States is in crisis. What I mean by that is that no matter what, you cannot get into higher education in the United States unless you're financially privileged or academically privileged. If you do not have either one of these, if you are, above average, tough luck, buddy. You have to be really rich and you have to be in mainstream finance. You need to have a social security number. You need to have a credit score for you to even score a loan. And these are really quite problematic things that I see in the higher education market. And the way I stand, politicians, the government, and even educational institutions in the United States do absolutely nothing for that. A case in point is you look at the big Ivy League schools. Collectively, their endowments are worth billions. I wouldn't be surprised if it's nearing the trillions. But the fact of the matter is, how many people are these institutions actually educating? Collectively, they're probably not even going to be 100,000. How does that make sense when these people are hoarding billions and billions of dollars that are not being used in the economy, but at the same time, they are under the guise of being a not-for-profit and being an educational institution, they're not producing enough people to quell the demand or satisfy the demands in the U.S. market. And I just don't necessarily understand that. And this is, and I'm picking on Ivy Leagues because obviously they're, easy targets, easy material to find. But every university is like that. Every public university, they have a massive endowment fund. Other than, I would say, the state schools, none of them are really working for the students. They are all focused on, Vanderbilt, earlier this year, they announced that their tuition is going to be $100,000.
Wow.
That's crazy. and in our own little way, I think this is what St. James School of Medicine is doing. We're trying to be a ladder for upward economic mobility. We want, like in our school, we have a significant portion of students who make less than $95,000 in family income. So moms and dad, and I've had calls from students who'd call me up and say that, hey, I just wanted to call and she's crying and she's saying, I just wanted to thank you guys for the opportunity because, my parents have blue collar jobs and, forget about medicine. Going to college was was not even an option for me. But she was like, you guys gave me scholarships. You guys gave me opportunities. She's not a straight A student, but she's a solid A- student, and she matched into residency and she did well. And now she told us that finally after 3 years of residency, I am looking to get that 6-figure salary and take my parents out of the lifestyle that they've had, which is working 3 jobs, working 16 hours a day. They don't have to do that anymore. That's what every educational institution should be. They should be a ladder for upward economic mobility, not ultra-wealthy people going to Harvard and remaining ultra-wealthy or getting wealthier. That's exactly what has happened in the United States. And that's something that I think St. James is truly and actively fighting, which is why our tuition has not really gone up more than 1.7% year on year. And we're very proud of that fact. In comparison, the statistic for the same time period from 2000 to 2021, public schools, private schools went up by about 21%, 19%, and public schools went up by almost 30% for the same period. And we're all adjusted for inflation, whereas we were at 1.7. When we started off in 1999, our tuition was about $70,000. Today, it's just a little over 100. And I'm very proud of our team to be able to maintain that and still be profitable. And so essentially we're proving that there is a sustainable model to higher education.
So let me ask this question. You've kind of brought up some points I know we have been talking a lot about in the U.S., especially as the politics talks about free tuition for everybody.
Right.
How would you improve the education system, knowing the things you just mentioned, with these endowments, with the way our system is structured? What changes could be made to improve higher education in the U.S.?
So I think this kind of goes back to what I was talking about, how I think corporate finance, the way we are taught corporate finance and the way we're taught to analyze companies and look at companies is a little flawed. What we look at in corporate America is essentially the real short term. Like if you go to any financial analyst and tell them about a long-term projection, they will laugh at you if you tell them to do anything beyond 7 years. Whereas if you go to other countries, like for example Japan, their long-term their short-term projections are about 7 years. And that's a significant difference. The average CEO for a Fortune 500 company is 2 years. Think about this. A leader of a company, all they're looking for is to maximize their personal output. That's why you have things like golden parachutes and all this random stuff that they're completely exercising. They're more interested in their own pocketbooks than they are with the overall company. And yes, you try to hire the best, and I'm not saying everybody's a sociopath and trying to line their own pockets, but I would think that the markets are skewing that particular role to be self-serving, essentially. And the issue with higher education is that they are not-for-profit entities, but they are gauged with the exact same lens that a publicly traded company is essentially looked at. If you go to corporate, like if you look at a financial analyst or anything, like look at, say, if there are opportunities, say, in muni bonds, they're using the same metrics for the bonds that an educational institution is producing versus, a publicly traded company or even a private company is releasing. I would say the economics of a not-for-profit, especially an educational institution, has to be dramatically different. And that's things that we don't necessarily really control for. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there are certain metrics that they tweak when they look at not-for-profits or they look at educational institutions. But, I mean, going back to the Ivy Leagues, an Ivy League apparently is revered the bigger their endowment fund is. I would think it should be the other way around. If you have a huge endowment fund, it means you haven't invested appropriately in your community and in your society. And that's the way I would look at it. And I think the very way we look at the success of institutions is, in my opinion, a problem. And this is not just a problem for like the education industry. It's a problem where for small businesses as well in the United States, because every single small business owner is waiting for an exit. We have idolized the image of retirement so much that I'm just going to retire and sit on the beach and sip a pina colada. How many retirees actually do that? They probably do that for a week. And after that, they're like really bored. And I think the way we've idolized this, so every small business owner, the only thing they're looking for is an exit. They don't really care about once the exit is happening, what happens to their company? Is it going to run? Is it not going to run? A great case in point is I forget the name of the slow cooker company.
Crockpot.
No, not Crockpot. The other one.
I don't know that one.
Yeah. So that company basically came up with a blockbuster product. It was taken over by a Fortune 100 company. Within a year, it started making losses because the company grew it too aggressively, whereas its niche, popular group of fans just, were not happy with the growth and the changes that happened, and they obviously let the founder go. Founder made a lot of money, and the founder just didn't, not that he didn't care, I'm sure he cares, but he sold it to somebody. It's no longer his.
Right.
And they made a mess of it. I think Starbucks is also an important case. In 2008, when the whole company was faltering, when the whole economy was faltering, the CEO came back and he turned the company around because only the founders have the insight and the intelligence to be able to run a company successfully. And that's the way we look at things. I think that's completely skewed. This whole concept that in America, the capital markets are a zero-sum game. If you win, somebody else has to lose. If you lose, somebody else has to win. I think that that's just not true. I mean, I've run small businesses. I'm running a mid-sized corporation now. I mean, it's just not true. I think that there is enough, and that's the beauty of the American economy. It's big enough that everyone gets a piece of the pie, and a satisfying piece of the pie. I'm not just talking about crumbs here. I'm talking about and everybody can. And when you go into a negotiation with that mindset, it makes a dramatic change. If you go into a negotiation saying that I'm going to screw this person over and I'm going to get I'm going to squeeze blood from a rock, that's one mindset. And it might work for some people. But if you go in saying, what is the middle ground here for this negotiation? What is the ground in which he's happy, I'm happy, or she's happy, I'm happy, and then we both walk away smiling? At that point, you just didn't have a successful relationship. You created an ally that's going to help you through thick and thin. And I think that that's the key way in which St. James does business, whether it's with our students, whether it's with our other vendors, versus, Shark Tank, for example.
Right.
I mean, this is like, I hate that show, not because it's not a good show, just because the concepts, what is it propagating? They're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and the people who don't get a deal, they put them in relatively bad light for the most part.
Right.
I mean, and I don't see anything wrong with it. These guys, the sharks, they don't know anything about the business. They're just going to pour money. They're going to look at returns. If they don't see returns, they're going to pull out, and the business fails after that. And that is such a big issue that I have with the way corporate finance is taught in the United States.
Well, I appreciate your input. I love to ask my guests this question. It kind of plays off what you just said. Thinking about the impact that you have had and are having, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I mean, I've never really thought about my personal legacy, but I would like the school to have a legacy. And I think the legacy that we are creating is the one that I would like to see it a little more better framed, so to speak. We are a school that is one of the last beacons of upward socioeconomic mobility. Most universities, and this is not to say that like big universities don't provide scholarships or anything, I'm sure they are, but they provide scholarships to academically advantaged students, which there are quite a few. But for example, our tuition is well within the earning capacity or the purchasing power of a middle class family. And that's been our focus. Our view is that education should not be unaffordable and education should not be a privilege. It should be a right. And the right, obviously, if we're a for-profit institution, we have to create a sustainable model. For that, we need to charge tuition. And yes, we could always come and say that, you know what, you have to pay $250,000 just like U.S. schools, because that's kind of the benchmark. In fact, some Caribbean schools charge $400,000. They're about 30 to 40% more than U.S. schools, some of the bigger ones. We're not like that. We're a very affordable school. We're going to remain that way. We're not, we really try to fight outward pressures as best we can. That's why I say we have a great finance team. We have a great marketing team, and they're constantly, absorbing business intelligence and figuring out what's the best way to make us competitive. So for example, we're investing in a $13 million building, but that's because we've realized, and with a lot of research and after speaking to a ton of consultants, that our return on investment is going to be high. A return on investment for the student is going to be higher if you have a nicer building, because learning environment dramatically matters and improves student outcomes. So we're not increasing tuition like crazy, which a lot of schools do. When I was in grad school, I remember our tuition went up by about 30% every quarter, which was insane, unless you paid up for the whole year up front.
Right.
So, and those are some of the things that I would like St. James to be. St. James to be a beacon of upward socioeconomic mobility, a beacon of quality, and this whole concept that you get what you pay for. I disagree with that. I think if there are people out there who genuinely want to make a mark in society, you will get a lot of leverage for, or a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak. There are a ton of not-for-profits out there that are doing amazing work by helping refugees and helping people with food banks and soup kitchens and stuff like that. They're doing great work. And I would like for St. James to be thought of as one of those amazing organizations that gave people an opportunity when they had none.
I love that. Where can people, maybe prospective students, find out more about St. James and follow you on social media?
Yeah, that would be great. Our website is www.sjsm.org. That's St. James School of Medicine, sjsm.org. And our hashtags are SJSM.
Well, thanks. And where can they connect with you on social media?
Yeah, same here. Well, I don't necessarily have personal social media, but everything is through St. James. So if you follow us on social media, you will be able to see our own podcast, which is called Med School Minutes. It's everything you need to know about going to med school, understanding med school, so that you can make the right decisions. I mean, it's not necessarily advertising St. James. It's basically giving you an idea of what Caribbean med schools are, and generally med schools in general, because it's a very tough course. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, a CPA was a cakewalk compared to an MD. But that's why I want students to be very, very well aware, not because they saw Grey's Anatomy and they're like, oh, I want to be a doctor today because, they're so pretty.
Right.
And you won't believe we get students with their personal statements who say things like that. But those are some of the people that we don't necessarily, we want them to be better informed so that they're not making the wrong decision. Because at the end of the day, 100,000 for over 4 years is still a lot of money. And I want them to be able to invest it in themselves in the right field based on their strengths. Now, if somebody's a great chef, I wouldn't recommend them going to medical school. Go to chef school and, focus on your strengths.
Well, thanks so much. This was a great conversation. Thanks for what you do and the opportunities that your school offers to really help transform and change the lives of ordinary people who are gifted and have a passion for medicine in that field. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haney. Really appreciate it. This was, we had a great time talking to you.
Yeah, blessings on what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trailblazers and Titans. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the insights shared, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue bringing you the stories of the world's most inspiring leaders. Don't forget to follow us on social media for updates and exclusive content. Join our community of Trailblazers and Titans, and let's continue to learn, grow, and transform our visions into reality together. Until next time, keep blazing your trail and striving for greatness.